So thanks so much. So just to kind of back up and again provide that kind of background and context from my perspective. So last summer's priority setting retreat with the board, we all agreed that the transition to Common Core state standards and the Smarter Balanced Assessment was an important topic that we wanted to have on our list for the year. During PAT contract negotiations, as you'll recall in the preamble that the association had, there were a number of concerns and values stated around testing and other educational issues. And at that time, we made it clear that through our comments and then also through the formal resolution that we brought forward in the fall, that while we agree with the values expressed in the preamble, the language we felt did not belong in the contract. So I just wanted to be clear that sort of this through line here, that now we are taking the opportunity as a board to state our values and position on this issue through this board resolution. So meanwhile, over the course of the year, in addition to the contract negotiations, the states continued their preparation for transition to the new assessment, including piloting it at 24 Portland Public Schools. There's, of course, continued to be a whole lot of debate, both locally and nationally. I know Director Buell in particular has devoted a lot of time and energy and engagement on this issue and expertise in that. And our district staff and teachers have continued working hard on professional development and implementation of the new standards. So the time is right, and it's really important for us as a board of the state's largest district to weigh in, stating our position on the transition. Back in April, as you'll recall, Common Core came on the agenda for an update and a presentation from staff and a board discussion. Which was great, but at that point, both Director Buell and I had prepared separate draft resolutions on the issue. So at the end of that discussion, during which what I heard was the majority of the board expressing generally support for the standards, but a number of concerns about the transition and the new assessment and the implementation of it. So Co-Chair Knowles asked myself, along with Director Buell, Co-Chair Belisle, and Student Representative Davidson to work with staff to come up with a single resolution for consideration at a future meeting. So staff organized a meeting with us, as well as a number of staff from Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, and then invited in Gwen Sullivan from the Portland Association of Teachers. And we had what I thought was an excellent, productive, and really collegial discussion. We identified a lot of common ground and shared values and concerns, so that was great. So then following that meeting, I took the lead on putting together the resolution, my goal being to include and hear input from everybody, but to reflect what I heard as the majority position on this issue, since of course the goal is to have a resolution that will pass by majority at least. So both staff and I worked on different drafts, which have circulated by email to the board multiple times. Director Regan in particular has made a number of good edits on a couple of occasions, so I appreciate that. So what with other issues that were on our agenda, like the budget and needing to approve the design for the high school, so there's been a bit of a delay in bringing this back to us, but here we are. So again, the plan is that we're going to discuss tonight, have a vote at our next meeting, I believe. So we have been circulating drafts by email since April, basically. For edits and input, and I hope we're fairly close to a final version, but tonight for sure it's still marked draft, an opportunity for any board members who haven't yet weighed in to do that, and for any final tweaks. I know Director Buell had some changes which we have here, which I appreciate that, having that in writing. And what I would propose is that during the discussion tonight, that both staff and I take notes on the input and any suggested edits. We're not formally voting on amendments or anything like that, but it would be great to get a sense just of the level of support, A, for the resolution itself, and B, for if there are any major changes that folks would want to see in it, to kind of get a sense of the level of support for those. And then what we can do, depending on how many issues or proposed changes there are. Again, hopefully we're not going to spend a lot of time on small wordsmithing tweaks. You could always send those by email. But depending on the number of major concerns or changes, then we'll do our best to, again, go back, maybe have another meeting of our group and kind of figure out where we can land on a final version to vote on. So that's just in terms of the process around the resolution itself, and what we're trying to accomplish from my perspective is that it makes a strong and clear statement of the board's values, that we do not believe in teaching to the test, that standardized testing is just one of many tools to be used in the assessment of student growth and in the evaluation of teachers, that testing should not dominate the culture or instructional time in our schools. Second major theme is that while we do not shy away from being held accountable, we want to ensure that any accountability measure for our students and schools is reliable, valid, and has been adopted with a culturally responsive lens. And then the resolution lays out a number of issues and concerns around the state's transition to the new assessment, including funding for professional development and technology, again, ensuring validity of the test, providing sufficient accommodations for English language learners and students with disabilities, and it calls on the state to not use the Smarter Balanced Assessment for punitive labeling or sanctioning. So obviously we cannot control through this resolution or other means the actions of the state and federal government, but it is important that we weigh in with our values and concerns, and to make clear to our staff in this building and in the schools that we know that they, along with the students and families, need support during this major transition, that we want high standards for our students, but that we also want to ensure that our students love learning and that that is what is happening in the classroom. So thanks for the opportunity to share that background and my perspective, and I'm just looking forward to the discussion.
So, discussion then. Anybody? Bobby?
Before we go too far, and thank you very much for that framing, I'm on the Oregon School Boards Association, and I was just at a National School Board Association meeting, and I will try to get a copy of this document that I was going to read from. But this is from the National School Boards Association Center for Public Education, put out a publication called Understanding the Common Core Standards. And the reason that I wanted to kind of do this extra framing, if it's possible, is they say that the public remains mostly unaware of the new standards or how they will affect schooling in their communities. And so I just wanted to take a moment to just kind of give a little bit more background on what Common Core standards even are. And I'm just going to skip through a couple of little things here. The Common Core state standards are academic benchmarks intended to define the knowledge and skills that high school graduates will need to be successful in college and careers. The standards have been endorsed by a whole variety of organizations, including National PTA and both of the national teacher unions. The Common Core standards establish grade level expectations specifically in math and English language arts. So we're not talking about the broad spectrum, but it's in those two areas, so it's a little bit more specific there. Internationally benchmark so that all students are prepared to succeed in our global economy and society. The Common Core is not a curriculum. It's a set of standards that describes the knowledge and skills students are expected to develop. It doesn't prescribe how to teach them, and I think that's a really, really important thing. As a parent, I certainly know that I hugely appreciate the creativity of teachers in our classrooms, so we obviously want to maintain that. The difference in Common Core is the attention paid to high-level skills like thinking critically, applying concepts learned, communicating well, using evidence, including data, beginning in very early grades. And one of the things that's I find really interesting is that the Common Core English Language Arts standards assume that reading and writing will not be the exclusive responsibility of English teachers. But instead, it is assumed that these skills will be taught across all subject levels and grade levels and grades. And so anyway, I just wanted to share a little bit of that because I think it helps to remind us what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. So for whatever that's worth, and then I'll engage in the conversation otherwise. But I just wanted to help
appreciate that.
with that additional framing. And I'll try to get this all to you.
Other comments? Steve, you must have. You've got an amended resolution here, so why don't you go ahead?
Well, I kind of took I wasn't real happy about how we went about this because I wanted to stay in the committee that we had kind of, I don't know if we'd formed it, but it was the committee, and it had, for instance, it had President of the Portland Association of Teachers on it, it had Melissa Goff on it, and she was chairing it up. So I thought it was a really good committee. Greg, were you there? Greg, and we had the student representative there, and I wanted to go through that committee and end up with what we came out with. I was willing to come out and argue it through and come out with it, because there's this huge, this is a complicated issue. I mean, I've read hundreds of articles on this, and I've talked to hundreds of teachers probably about the Common Core, and it's not necessarily that the Common Core is this evil thing. It's really the reverse. It's just not necessarily that the Common Core is this great thing. You can sit and you can go through the Common Core and find some pretty interesting things. If you went out and talked to all our teachers, you would have teacher after teacher say, yeah, I kind of like this part. I mean, the new NEA president, when said herself, you know, I really like the Common Core. That was the NEA president. But she also said the testing needs to we need to get rid of that. The testing is horrible, what we're doing with children and how we're using the testing. The Common Core is not, it's, you know, decent. It's not a salvation or even close to a salvation. It's just another set of standards. Nobody has ever, standards have never been proven to educate children. And it's not that it's not a curriculum. There's all sorts of curricular things in there. Parts of speech is in the Common Core. I mean, it's the whole situation with the Common Core is not really, is it good or bad? It's no different than the standards we've had necessarily. It just has a better PR group of people. I mean, people are making millions and millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars on the Common Core. They're more than that, hundreds of millions of dollars on the Common Core. People are making it, and so they come out and push it, just like we push all these people. I'm walking downtown today, and person after person after person is smoking. Well, why would anybody start smoking? Because they gets advertised and pushed and so forth. And there was a lot of young people. You're going, what the heck? Well, it's the same with the Common Core. And so the Common Core, if we had this attitude about the Common Core, you would never hear me say a word about it. If in the district attitude, and this is what I would eventually like to get to, we would be able to say, you know, there's some good things in the Common Core. We need to look and see if there's some good things in there, and we need to add them in if there are, into what we're doing. If we did that, I'd shut up and say, let's quit it right now. But that's not how it works in schools. In schools, it's, we're going to push the Common Core. I talked to a teacher who, in this school system, he was doing, he was in a little bit of trouble for his teaching. And so the assistant principal was in his room 36 times during the year, always pushing on Common Core, Common Core, Common Core, Common Core. Now, I'm telling you, doing good Common Core isn't going to make you a better teacher, really. That's not how it works, but that's how we, as a district, seem to be approaching it often. And it's not that we're any different than anybody else in the country. Everybody else in the country approaches it this way. And it's the wrong way to approach it. We need to approach it in a much more intelligent way. So the question really, in a way, on the Common Core itself is not the stuff that the National School Boards Association puts out, and no offense, Bobby, but it's not right. It's just not accurate. It's not really, it is, if you read 200 other articles negatively, you'll say, oh, well, they said this, but that's not right. It's not put out that way. And is it doing any damage? In our high schools, the Common Core itself is probably doing some good things. How we're approaching it, and I don't mean implementing it, I mean approaching it, we're doing a lot of damage in the high school. But there's a real problem with the Common Core, and that's in the K2, particularly kindergarten. It's doing tremendous damage. Because I talked to a principal a couple months ago, and I walked into a kindergarten classroom, and they had, it looked like a 5th grade classroom. And this was a really good principal. I could tell by just walking around, all the little kids were waving at her, and she was a good principal, and I've had people speak highly of her. And I walked into that classroom, I said, to myself, this looks like a 5th grade classroom. This is kindergarten. And we walked out of the classroom, and I said, geez, I didn't see any play area. And she says, kids can play at home. That's the Common Core. They're changing the structure of how we're dealing with kindergarten, which then moves into the other areas across this whole country, yet they didn't have anybody who ever taught in kindergarten in their entire lives involved in doing that. So there is destructiveness if you approach it wrong, which I think we're doing too much of. Okay, so that's step one. That's over here, though. That's not this resolution. This resolution is talking about the SBAC test. So to begin with, the SBAC assessment does not, here's what it's not going to do for us. It's not going to give us a grade level reading assessment. The Oaks kind of does that. If you look at the Oaks questions and you look at the Smarter Balanced assessment, it doesn't give us a grade level. It's not going to give us foundational skills in mathematics. It doesn't do that. It's not going to give us a writing assessment of our children. Can our children write? Well, if I'm a parent and I walk into the 4th grade or 5th grade classroom, I want to know if is my kid at grade level? Now, we have other stuff that does that, but are we doing it and thinking about it? I want to know, can my kid do foundational mathematics skills? I want to know, can my kid write decently well? I want to know if my kid's behaving himself or herself. That's what I want to know. That this test doesn't do any of those things. What this test does is tell you if the kid can solve trick questions which are related in some manner to some sort of reading strategies that came down from some group of people who weren't classroom teachers, had never been in school, had not taught in schools, and are making hundreds of millions of dollars on it. And they developed a test to tell if you're doing it. So what do you have to do if you fail that test? If your kids are going to now fail that test, huge numbers of our kids are going to fail that test. We know that. They won't even let our director of learning and teaching look at the test to see if it's any good. And yet we're supporting it and spending, probably in the end, we're probably eventually spending, because we're spending for each test, millions of dollars in the district based on what? Because we want to test the standards that aren't necessarily any better than any other standards we've ever had. I'm just saying, let's change our attitude about how we're looking at it and saying, why are we being pushed and suckering into this thing? Why are we coming in? So, yeah, you want to do Common Core? Fine. Kind of do it and go through, and it's fine. It's not going to hurt things as long as you don't shove it right down teachers' throats and demand that that's what they do, and under all these circumstances, and think it's going to solve your problems, because it ain't solving anybody's problems. So we spend all this time and energy on solving our problems, but we don't get any of them solved, and all this money. But the testing is beyond that. The testing, this should be saying to the state, no, we ain't going to do this test. If we wouldn't do this test if we didn't have to, and we think you're making a mistake, to ask us. We should be testing whether our children are at grade level in reading. We should be testing whether our children can do foundational skills in mathematics, and we should be testing writing. And then beyond that, we should not be really testing anything. We should be teaching children science and social studies and PE and so forth. And the idea, and what's happened, everybody in education practically goes overboard. Where, yes, literacy is incredibly important, but to do literacy in PE, which is if you, and I can find you ones, I could go find literacy things in PE, what's the point of that? There's not really a point to it. We should be doing science in science, social studies in social studies, and guess what? Children will learn to read. We should be focusing on getting kids to read. So we're spending millions of dollars on testing children in this state, and we can't even get librarians into our schools, which are proven to read. No one has proven that this helps one child. There's no research that says the Common Core state standards have ever helped one kid. And so what I'm trying, all I try to do is do two things with this resolution. And I'll stop here. I know it takes a long time, but I'm sorry, it's a long time. It's a long discussion. I really apologize for it, but it is. But I was trying to do two things. One, kind of move out some of the education ease that sneaks in there when we have the administrative educational people write, and just kind of move that out. And the other thing was, this hardens it up a little bit. So the problem with it, for me, if you're really going to look at it and think about it, do you want to harden it up or not? Or not? I mean, if you want to harden it up, fine. I made it a little tougher and said, okay, this is a bad deal. We ought to do like that. I think you should leave the education ease out, the rigor and those kind of words and stuff. But hardening it up, it's fine. I tried to write it so it might actually be acceptable to people. I wrote one that was the way that we should do it. I don't think we're going to do it that way, but this one might be acceptable, so that's where I try to go. Thank you for that time. I really appreciate you taking it with me, allowing it.
Okay. Other comments? No?
I didn't get a chance to see your email today, so this was the first time
Yeah,
I had
know.
a chance
I
to
apologize for that, but I
see this.
was irritated about us not doing it in the committee, so I waited to the very end. Thought we might get down to it.
I think, though, I really appreciated your comments tonight, Steve, and I think there's I'd be interested, perhaps not tonight, but to talk with you at some point about the role generally that standards play in a classroom, in a district, because I think there is, and I don't think you're suggesting this, but anything different, but I think there is a role, and I believe you're right. Standards are standards, and that's not what educates our kids. That being said, your comments, some of your adjustments, I actually feel are completely on par. I would probably make some adjustments because I'm probably more aligned with, particularly in resolutions. Brevity is good when resolving things, but number one, you suggest removing. The second line is the pedagogy is designed to meet, which, by the way, if you were really looking at wanting to eliminate the education ease, you would remove pedagogy.
Yeah, I don't ever use that word. I just left it there because I was trying to get.
I know, I'm kidding you. The pedagogy is designed to meet the needs of all students, and removing the rigorous standards of achievement and to meet the needs of all students. I think the point is made that this is something that's designed to meet the needs of our students. And I think the clarity in that should be good for our superintendent enough to follow, since this is a resolution directing our superintendent. And also, actually, you make that clarity of directing staff versus directing the superintendent. I would probably, in that first one, and I don't know if we necessarily want to go line by line here, and I apologize if that, but Steve has a few things that a few points, and it's probably.
Just go ahead and go.
Yeah,
Okay.
Full.
Okay.
What you think?
The rest of that, I think what has been written and what you are saying are very similar. I think you give a direction, for example, teachers should not teach directly to the test nor spend inordinate amounts of class time on testing except for some minor test-taking instructions. I actually like the language around and that assessments are implemented to maximize intended flexibility, collaboration, learning, and creativity in the classroom. I think, and this might just be sort of a style difference for me. I like that a little better. I think to me, it says the same thing. I think I get your point and what you're trying to direct and saying, hey, we need a specific example of this. I wonder if there's another area where we can provide a specific example. But that's my assessment of that.
So just if I can clarify.
Essentially, I would remove
Right.
the quote, the rigorous standards of achievement and to meet just that part out of your number one and keep the rest of it.
Okay, hold on a second. Meet the rigorous standards. Okay, so
Comment on
the
that?
pedagogy is designed to meet the needs of all students and so forth. And keep
Correct.
it.
I'll
So,
comment on that.
any other thoughts on that?
Just a second.
Okay, great.
Let everybody else have it.
Thanks.
Okay, Steve, you, go ahead.
I was just trying to sneak that through there. I mean,
think we need-
It's in red, Steve.
What I'm trying to, what I was trying to sneak
I can read it
through
without my
Right.
glasses.
is, really, the stuff that you would like to leave in, those 4 things, don't say anything to me. I looked and I thought, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything to me, really, because it's not a direct thing. I was trying to say, we need to tell our teachers and our principals, we don't want you teaching directly to the test. And that's what I was trying to sneak in there to go, because
I
if
think
you
it's
pass,
explicit.
if you
Yeah,
pass
you're-
this, man, I would hammer on this for the next year. No, that's not, you're not supposed to be teaching directly to the test, because we're doing that all over the place. Not in every school, but in many of our schools, we're doing it way beyond what we are. So I was trying to sneak that through, and so the question, I would say, if you want us teaching to the test, you think that's a good idea, then go back to the old language. If you think that
think that's what the old
we don't want, the old language isn't say, I don't think it's saying that at all, really. I'm saying, we don't want to be teaching to the test out there, and we want to teach to the whole child, and testing is not where we are as a school district. That's what I was trying to say. If you want to say that's not how we are, that's not a problem
Well,
for me. I mean, it's a problem for me personally, but.
I feel like
go
that's
ahead.
where, I mean, that's why we have a pretty extensive recital section that lays that out.
But the
pretty
recital
clearly.
is meaningless, right, on all these, because it doesn't have any, the recital section has no, it
But
has no.
there also can be an unintended.
It's not,
It's legislative history. You go back to the recital.
It's not, yeah, you go back if you do, but it doesn't direct the superintendent to do the recitals. I mean, I'd have rewritten the recitals if we were gonna do it. It just, that's why I didn't mess with it.
Yeah, and I guess to me, it's important to craft the resolves in a way that is not creating unintended consequences, which is why it was important for me to have this framed in a way that is not, I guess I just disagree that the message that would come from this if we left the language there is that we want to teach to the test, because that's not very
No,
clearly not.
are you saying in your language, are we on record that your language means
Right,
that
so
we're directing the
the P-
superintendent to tell our teachers and our principals to not teach to the test?
The PPS
And that
school
we're
board-
going to, you're going to be in trouble with our new administrators if you got teachers out there teaching the test and we don't want to do that? I mean,
PPS
that's
school
what I'm
board-
saying in mine.
The PPS School Board does not support teaching to the test. We believe, I'm reading C, we believe in teaching the whole child and in the ability of skilled educators to creatively instill a lifelong love of learning. In accordance with state law and our own values, standardized testing is only one of many tools to be used in the assessment of student growth and in the evaluation of teachers. Testing should not dominate the culture or instructional time in our schools. As a school board, we believe the ultimate role of assessment is to improve instruction, not to demean teachers or principals or to label students
Can we
or
move that to
schools.
the resolution? If we would move that to the resolution, I would stand up and buy everybody drinks or something.
It's tempting, Steve.
Let's move that to the resolution, and then I'd go, oh yeah, because so often we say one thing and then we don't do it. I don't
Well,
want to do
let's-
that anymore.
Let's put that on the list of
I-
supported change.
Put it in the resolution, and I'm going, okay.
Okay, so we've got that as, so Matt had an edit that everyone seemed to be okay with to resolve number 1. Steve suggests moving C to the resolves. I'm just kind of creating a running
Might be
list
in
of.
repeat it, maybe. I think you might want to repeat it, because it really
Oh.
does tell a story in the
Okay.
recitals. I mean, there's a reason it's
Maybe there's a
worded.
shorter version.
Yep.
Well, put it in both places.
Yeah.
Okay, so repeat C to some degree. So I'm just creating my little working list here. Okay, so then, Matt, do you want to keep going through? You're on a roll there. Steve had some proposed changes to Resolve 2 and Resolve 3. So I didn't know if you wanted to do the same thing on there.
So, again, I know these are, I felt like these were 2 different ways to say the same thing.
Right, exactly.
Frankly. And I don't think Steve is trying to be sneaky
wasn't
by
the
any
one
means.
part.
I think he is.
But I think there is a nuanced difference. One reads, the school board calls upon the state to provide the funding necessary to implement the Smarter Balanced Assessment effectively, including funding and time for both professional development and technology resource implementation. I think talking about that explicitly is important, because those are some of the things that we've already heard are concerns that we have.
We could go on all day about unfunded mandates from the state, but that's not the focus. That's not the topic of this resolution.
And then Steve's portion is the PPS School Board calls upon the state of Oregon to provide funding necessary to carry out any of the state's educational mandates, including standardized testing. I do kind of like the idea of including something in there about other state mandates. Now,
So,
whether or
yeah.
not that is, I mean, this is it may be hidden in a resolution focused on the smarter balanced assessment, but I think it is something that
Yeah.
probably we could all agree on.
Right, oh, totally. I mean, we do have up in I, the last sentence, adding new unfunded mandates jeopardizes school districts' fragile ability to reinvest resources, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't think we have a board meeting that goes by that we don't talk about unfunded mandates from the state and the,
Yeah, this is
so
just,
this is
Can I
nothing
can I
new.
I don't
comment
just- yeah,
here
sorry,
for
go ahead.
one second?
Sure, Bobby.
I see David Williams in the audience, and I don't know David, and I'm not asking you to come up immediately, but would you look at our legislative, every year we pass legislative policies and priorities, and I think this is covered in there really clearly already. And do you have that
Last year's.
language, or would you be able to find it for us? Because it might be
Yeah.
worthwhile looking at that.
Yeah, I mean-
Because again, I think it is something that we already have on record and that we share with legislators pretty regularly, that there shouldn't be unfunded mandates. So I guess I would be a little bit inclined to keep this more specific to this particular issue, but.
yeah.
Let me
Yep.
say why I changed it. That wasn't really a trick. The language here sounded to me like, you know, if you pay us, and it sounds to me like this in the language. Let's wait 2 years to figure this out. And that's not what I think that's where I disagree. I don't think we wait 2 years to see if it works. I think we tell them, this isn't gonna work. This is not going to work. I don't care if we wait 10 years. And that's about what it takes, 10 years. Normally, because the AYP is, and so this language kind of said, okay, if you would just take care of the funding of it, we would be fine with it. That's kind of what I felt the language, and that's not what I was trying to. What I was saying is I was trying to leave in that, but going broader and saying, okay, because it's not going to work. I'm sorry. We all know that it's not going to work. And so telling them that it might work if you save us the money is not going to work. It's not ever going to work.
And I guess I disagree with that, so I don't know where others are.
That's the difference.
So,
But thanks for
for me,
clarifying.
thank you, Steve. For me, I like the idea of being more specific because I think it's stronger. To just say any state mandate, that's, like I said, we do that almost every board meeting, and it's in a lot of it's in our legislative priorities, it's other places. But I think that given that this is an amendment, or this is a resolution regarding the smarter balanced assessment, that we should be specific to that. I just think it's stronger language, so
Okay.
that's
Any
where I
other-
am. I'm not opposed to including the big one, I just think it weakens the resolution.
So, to me, it's possible to do an and rather than an or. I mean, if you took Steve's language, it's not contrary to what we've already
yeah.
said.
Right.
We could potentially say the Portland School Board calls upon the state of Oregon to provide funding necessary to carry out any of the state's educational mandates, period. The school board calls upon, or specifically, comma, the school board calls upon the state to provide the funding necessary to implement the smarter balance assessment effectively, blah, blah. So,
Yeah, I like that.
I
That's
don't
a
know
good
if that would
solution.
Get
Okay.
a little bit closer.
Should we constantly include that in every resolution?
Yeah.
Okay, I think, yeah,
Just say specifically.
specifically, wait a minute.
And I don't have a strong preference. Again, to me, it does sound it states the same thing in slightly different ways. But I wanted to clarify, Steve. I think you said that your number 2 sends a message that it's not going to work. It's not ever going to work. And I don't read that in number
I don't
2.
either.
So I just wanted to clarify. If that's your intent, it seems that it needs some significant rewording.
I don't think anybody would you want to significantly reword it so that is the clear
No,
intent?
I just
No,
wanted to
I'd be
clarify.
glad
You
to
made
do
a
that.
comment. I was like, I had to reread
But
it again.
necessary to
make
carry
sure.
out any of the state's education plan. No, it wasn't sending that. I'm just saying that the reverse sent the other message,
I got
like
you.
it might work. mine doesn't, I didn't write in here.
actually
"This
hoping
is-
it will
you
work,
fools,
so
this is
that's
never going to work."
Crazy neat.
Because but I would, I mean, because
Okay.
it's the way it
Okay.
actually
No
is.
doubt.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, that's great. Okay,
Is that
so.
enough on that one, Ruth?
I think I've got that.
Okay,
and
Matt,
Hopefully
we're
Amanda's
back over to
taking.
you. Back over to you. You actually are the one on the floor. At the floor.
Okay, so I think number 3, and this is the last of the ones that Steve's made some recommended changes on. For me, again, it's maybe the same way of, there are different ways of saying the same thing. One of the things that I do like is, I mean, Steve, you say it, I think, more emphatically, in that, quote, smarter balanced assessment which does not measure grade level reading, basic mathematics or writing skills, and is an unproven test. I think in the version that Ruth presented says premature use of an unreliable or invalid smarter balanced assessment could undermine. This is where this is valuable to me because I feel like it's something that I've echoed
This is actually Bobby's.
in my concerns, and I know Bobby as well and others too, but undermine student enthusiasm for learning, could create devastating outcomes for schools, and frankly, we've seen this as with
Absolutely.
Oaks
No
and other
child
things
left
come
behind.
out. It's ridiculous, and could set schools and communities back years if not managed well at the state and local levels. I like the language around that, and if there was a design that could offer sort of an and situation in both of these, because I don't disagree with the language. Again, I feel like they're in many ways saying the same thing in different ways, but I would like to retain that the premature use of an unreliable or invalid assessment could do these things. I mean, I would probably say will do. We're almost assured. It all but assures that these are the outcomes that we'll see. But I don't know how others feel about that. I don't know, Steve, how you feel
No,
about my comments.
So,
I think there's truth, and I'm still back at the issue of that premature use of an unreliable or invalid smart amount. Well, the use of it, maybe you can dump out the premature, because are they ever going to get to the point where if you're just measuring the standards and not, I mean, that this is worth the time and money and energy and everything that we're putting into it? Are they ever going to get to that point? So I'm
So
going to
maybe
take out
just-
the word premature and put the use of an invalid, because it's pretty invalid at this point.
Use of an
And we don't
unvalid.
know, because we won't even,
Oh, just
we
to
can't even
take
look
out
at
the
it to
word-
tell.
Take out the word premature?
yeah.
Sure,
Yeah,
yeah, okay, so use.
Yeah, that was what we.
I would
Yeah,
also
so-
take out the words, now that I'm looking at it, if assessments are used in this way, we should just take that out. We should say,
Okay.
the school board requests that the state not use the smarter balance assessment for punitive labeling or sanctioning of students, teachers, schools, or districts, period, specifically. There must be
Remove-
assurances of the reliability and validity of the test, use of an unreliable, yeah, actually, that
Okay,
works.
that's great, good. So otherwise, so those changes, and that's it for 3, okay. Thanks.
so the only other thing I
Mhm.
thought was missing in here, Ruth, was something around the communication and with
Yeah,
parents.
And it was
I
in
don't
here at one
know-
point, but there's been so many iterations and versions of this, so
I think
maybe
it's
it
in-
got dropped by accident. 'Cause I
don't
thought
know
we
if
had
it's,
that in there.
I don't see anything in the resolution around it.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember if I saw it in the recitals.
It wasn't an earlier version, so I apologize, we need,
Is it
so
number
I
8?
agree.
Number 8.
Resolve number 8.
Oh, number 8. Okay, it is a number 8, but maybe it needs to be highlighted or written differently so that it's noticeable, because if it
Yeah.
didn't pop out at you, then that means it maybe didn't work. So in the meantime, the school board asked the PPS staff, state, and other partners to continue to expand their efforts to inform and engage parents and community during the transition.
I think you need to, I think that should be the school board directs the superintendent,
Okay.
because we don't direct the staff, we direct the superintendent. And we can direct the state as well.
Well, unfortunately, we can't direct the state and ask the state
We can ask the state.
and other partners to continue, and I could
I say we direct them.
we might want to say something rather than to continue to expand, to continue and expand their efforts.
Yes.
And I have felt like a lot of the communications materials really are just not very satisfactory. So, I mean, if there's a way that, and I don't know if the state is ever going to provide ones that are, and whether, we don't necessarily have the capacity to do that. One thing that I thought was helpful was our staff produced that video showing teachers in action, and
Right.
something like that.
Thought
That's
that was
not, that's really, or having teachers and principals come and talk to us and have the public be able to hear how examples of how it works. Something like that would be really great.
And then on number 9, you want to, I think school board directs the superintendent, again,
thanks.
taking out the staff reference.
Thank you.
Yep.
See if there's any others of those. And there's another one in number 1, which we'll fix. Okay.
Yeah.
So, excellent. Other, and this has been, there's so many different ways you can write all these different sentiments, so obviously there's different ways we could wordsmith it, but if there's any other missing pieces, things that you need in there. Director Curler isn't here tonight, so I'll continue to, obviously we'll be
Reach out to
sharing
him.
the next iteration with everybody.
I guess one of the things that we should at least consider is if you look at the recital J, many national organizations have called for a moratorium of at least a year. This is talking about sanctions, but I think there are many organizations that are calling for a delay, make sure districts are ready. We should probably at least talk about whether we want to weigh in there.
On the delay in the test itself, not just on.
Or whether we would recommend that the state consider next year sort of a pilot year rather than it really gives us an opportunity to try it without it necessarily meaning anything, because we need to make sure we get it right. So I guess I'm still open to the suggestion, and it seems like more and more people are saying that, are we ready? Are we as a state ready, and are we as districts ready? And I guess, I look at, technology and, all kinds of things that districts across Oregon need to be making accommodations around in order to get this right. And, are you confident right now, Superintendent, in terms of Portland Public Schools, that we are ready to at least pull off the testing part of it? Or would it be helpful for us to be saying to the state, look at this as a kind of a pilot year, and, we'll see where the kinks are across the state? I don't know, I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, I think that's, we piloted in 24 schools this year. We don't have the results back from what what happened in the pilot. Yeah.
So one of the things, and this is, this is information that I received from a second grade teacher about who, at one of the schools that this is being piloted at, but, and this was a little shocking to me, frankly, is around technology, the need for a third grader to go from writing down their thoughts in a paragraph form to typing that.
Keyboarding skills.
And the skills associated with keyboarding is one. And now the need for identifying that as a skill set to begin teaching in kindergarten as students enter. So by third grade, it's no longer a barrier. Now, one of the things when we talked about this as a number of weeks, probably months ago, was the digital divide that is very real. And there are kids entering our system that have no access to computers, none. And that doesn't change when they get to school unless there's a classroom with a smart board, or there's a school that has iPads, or there's something like that, and that isn't everywhere. So I think there's significant barriers that we have to consider, and that technology, and that's why I wanted to be explicit in that one, is certainly one of them. But I'm still wrapping my head around learning a typing as a skill set. I think by the time these students who are entering kindergarten, the keyboard is going to be obsolete. frankly.
You just speak to it.
Um,
You just dictate.
That's, I mean, but we have to now teach that in
Right.
second or first or kindergarten for a third
Yeah.
grader to take a test.
We used,
So
we used to teach it all the time, back in the day.
Well, I took it-
Not in kindergarten, but in grade school.
I took it in ninth
I
grade
took
on
it-
a
Did you?
typewriter.
No, I
Yeah.
took it in high school.
Yeah.
I took it in sixth grade.
Middle.
one
And
of the
I'm
other-
glad I did.
One of the other
Yeah.
things, Matt, that maybe I would be helpful, I know that that we're not really getting information back from the state on the results of our 24 schools that piloted it, but
Mhm.
I hope that you or we have been collecting information from those 24 schools on where we tripped or where we realized, oops, and it looks like
You wanna
we
come on up
are
and
I
like-
see Melissa
speak to
Goff
that, Melissa?
To me, it
there
would be-
shaking her head,
That would be
yes.
helpful information
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
to have and maybe to share with our community. And again, it's not the results, but it is
Yeah.
the,
Well, and then just
What
to
are we
make,
learning?
What are the
just make the
issues?
really
Yeah, what
obvious
have we
point, this
learned?
is not the last time we'll be talking about this
Okay.
topic. Obviously, we'll be
Right.
continuing to
Yeah,
share
so
your
the question is, how are we engaging with the users? We call those user stories.
so do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Melissa Goff. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. The user stories that we've collected have been very much what Director Morton referenced. Part of our challenge in a district where, as we have, and this is not unique to Portland, but as we have seen our investments in education decline over time due to the economy, priorities have had to be set, some of which influenced technology purchasing over time. There has not been a large-scale investment by the state in technology. The reason it's important to note is not only the keyboarding aspect of whether or not that might be a defunct skill in a few years, but really practical pieces, such as our third grade students needing to be able to drag and drop on a screen, but they've never worked on a screen where they need to drag and drop. So, our user stories that we're collecting are not only telling us about the technology, what we're finding is the technology itself that we have available, we believe we're gonna have enough technology available with the basic productivity that we need in order to test. The question is whether or not our students are going to be able to engage in the test and show what they know and are able to do because they don't have access to technology on an ongoing basis throughout their career.
So I'm hearing then potentially, so under K, we have a bulleted list of a number of issues. So it's sounding to me as if we're adding, and we could work with you on how to word this and then run it by everybody, but something around the issue of access to technology and the grades leading up to third grade and having those skills.
And Melissa, could I ask one other quick question?
You
Want a
may.
copy?
You may have a
One of the things I also understand is that the test is not being necessarily translated into every language for our
Right.
kids. And so what are the accommodations that will be necessary?
So there's a delay in that, and what we're still trying to ascertain is how much flexibility we will be having for our students who are emerging bilingual students. One of the advantages that we did have with Oaks has been that it has been available in more than just English. Because of, as you were stating earlier, Smarter Balanced being developed and field tested as late as spring, and us not, as a state, having access to the results of those field tests until December, translating those materials is not going to happen prior to the field testing results being analyzed.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be a limitation for our students. It will impact us.
It also has a potential of dramatically impacting the test results then
Mhm.
for districts that have more emerging bilingual students versus districts that don't. And how is the state then going to measure that?
Right.
Yeah, and I think a very real question that I don't know if we have asked yet, but as you bring that up would be wise for us to ask, is we are, and your resolution addresses asking for a waiver from penalty. We are held accountable to participation in assessment. If we have a large number of emerging bilingual students at a site and their native language is other than English, and there's not an assessment available in that language in their second year, third year, fourth year in country and yet still struggling, what happens to participation? How do we get them started on a test where they may not be able to
Right.
engage in the initial instructions.
And
Go ahead, Matt.
I would say as we continue along this process, I mean, I consider this as a sort of a first step
Right.
for our board. But as we continue along this, I mean, what I'm going to be looking at is how are these tasks disproportionately impacting those students that as a district we have already identified as underserved, as having other barriers, and as a district, an organization I feel is responsible for removing barriers to student education. Are we creating yet another barrier to students? We're talking about kids who don't have access because of poverty. We have a disproportionate number of our kids of color within our district who fall within that category. We have students who are within special education, students who are English language learners. We have students who are on free and reduced lunch. These are all students who we've identified as our equity group, and we've actually invested in them because of this. So how are we creating those additional barriers? And I think that's where my observation is going to be sitting squarely.
So could I suggest maybe under K, on the second bullet, is providing, of our list of challenges and concerns, is providing sufficient accommodations and smart balance assessment for English language learners and students with disabilities. And maybe we need to strengthen that and add to that around the creation of new barriers to student success, or some wording along those lines.
Something around poverty and the ability or the access to technology.
The state should not be making things worse or
Right.
putting us in a position where we're struggling even more to serve our underserved students.
Right, and
I
by
don't
the
have the
way,
wording right now, but
the Oregon Educational Investment Board has an equity policy as well. And with the very similar student populations identified in that equity policy. So
Right.
that's the language that we should be holding OEIB and ODE accountable to when
Well, the
implementing.
other thing is,
Maybe that's a
yeah.
res-
Including that in the recital would be.
I like referring to the
great.
OEIB's language about that in the
Yes.
recital.
Yeah.
I think
like
that's
that.
great.
And then also calling out that we don't want there to be barriers. So,
Well, and the fact is that our students, our English language learners and our high poverty students who haven't necessarily had the same exposure to technology could artificially end up doing way worse on this test when in fact it isn't measuring, which I think is the
Right.
big issue, it isn't measuring what they
Right.
know at all. It's measuring, you know,
How
their,
well they use
their lack
technology.
of ability to use
Disproportionately
technology or the
Right.
lack of translation services. And so that's, you know, and I think that's what our teachers are constantly saying to us is, you know, is it a valid test?
okay.
Right.
So that's excellent, thanks. So could I get back to what Bobby raised as a question around, do we want to add to this something around, because we have in here, don't use it for punitive labeling or sanctions, and don't,
How is that, I guess
That's-
I'm questioning how that's different than doing a moratorium, and we're actually asking them we're not putting a time period on this, we're saying, don't ever do this, right? Is that what
I
you
think that there are
meaning there?
certainly some organizations who are basically saying, don't do the test next year at all. We're not ready. And again, I'm not convinced that that's where we want to land. But I do know if we use it, I want it to be a year in which we kind of figure out.
An
And maybe,
evaluation
yeah, and
opportunity
maybe
for the test,
send
right.
information to the
Right.
state on, you know, here's the things you need to do before we use this in any meaningful way as a valid assessment.
So as part of
So
that,
it's,
you would
it's that question.
Right.
I don't know that I necessarily.
As part of that, you'd have to have the state actually let you know how your students did on the test.
right.
Right.
So what the pieces that we have in here is, we don't have in here, don't do the test. We have, when you do this test, it needs to be valid. Don't use it for labeling and sanctioning, and you can't use it right away as part of the teacher evaluation system because there's no baseline data to
Right.
compare it to. So that's the things we've said thus far, so I think it's a really good question of whether we want to say anything additional around even delaying the test itself, or strengthen the statement around making it more of a transitional pilot year.
I like the idea of a transitional year versus don't do it. I mean, we've already piloted it in 24 schools, so I think that, I mean, that's me. I think that we should continue down the road of testing the test, I guess. See how,
So
see
something like
where
the first year
problems are.
of testing using the Smarter Balanced should be, I don't know what the exact wording is, something should be a transitional or
Right.
piloting
Yes.
year,
I'm
and
not
then you could
sure.
move into requests that you don't use it
Right.
for sanctions and so forth.
I'm not sure that I would limit that to a year, Ruth. I think that
Till they're ready.
maybe the state needs to figure out the standards for when they consider the test to be ready.
But it
And at
needs to be in
that
a
time-
transparent way,
Yeah,
not
oh, yeah.
the black box of the state deciding it's ready without
Absolutely.
any
Yeah.
way of vetting that.
Well, again, the districts need to have access to those results
Right.
so that they can look at them and see why some of their students may have done poorly on it.
So I think we're all, maybe I'm beginning to fade in my wordsmithing ability here, so I don't know if anyone else, otherwise we can go back to staff and come up with something. What I'm hearing is something around at the beginning of 3 that talks about the transition period of using the
Right.
test.
Right. Steve?
We're stepping into a sticky little area. I like everything that you're doing, Ruth. I think it's great what you're doing there. And what we all pretty much agree with what everybody has said. But there's a little sticky thing, which is when all these kids do fail, we don't want to go out to, I mean, we're going to have huge failure. This underserved population dealing with this, I mean, it's going to be incredible. But when that happens, we need to respond correctly to. It shouldn't be responding by telling our principals they need to start getting these kids to pass the tests, because the tests are no good, basically, and they're not testing what we should be testing. So, I mean, what I'm saying is when we get to that point, I'm hoping that we don't just start saying, okay, and think of these tests as a test that actually is measuring what we want to measure, because it's not measuring what we want to measure. It's not even, it's measuring whether we are doing the Smarter Balanced enough. And the way to do that the best, to pass the test, is to do more and more and more and more of that, which is not good education. So we have to do, I'm just saying, and not with this, I'm just tossing
No,
this out
actually,
because it's
I
late
think
at
that's-
night.
I
We want to
don't
be
agree
real
with-
careful when we get and talk about this is, are our children doing well on this test? Well, the way to get them to do well on the test is to not give them a good education to a certain degree. To make their education weaker allows them to test better, because we focus on those things that we think are going to be on the test, and we teach them the tricks. You teach them the tricks on how to deal with this test, because eventually people are going to figure that out.
So I guess for me, the part of what all that you just said that I really agree with is around responding appropriately. And I don't know if we need to add that in at this point, but I think that is a
I
really
don't think we
important
need
point.
it. No, it's
that-
down the line.
Because we were saying up front, here's are our values, and we don't want to teach to the test, we want to value education. But it's a really important point during this difficult transition. We want to make sure that there isn't the reaction of, now therefore we need to reinforce that point. So I think that's,
Yeah, I know,
that's
yeah.
well
I think
said.
that's where that rubber meets the road for us as a board is that, in fact, the next, if and when that happens, we're resting and we're responding based on the values that we've outlined here.
Okay,
That's mine. Anything less than that, I think, would be pretty insincere.
yeah.
So if the kids do worse on the test, we give the superintendent a raise, a big one, right?
I don't know that I would say that.
Well, I think
Because that
it's
means
not
they're
for
doing
kids.
better on the
That would be
whole-
incentifying
But it's
tests.
having that discussion in the context of what we lay out here. Okay, now how do we respond? And what's the appropriate response in the classroom?
Pam,
Does that
like
make
Melissa
sense?
wants to say
Melissa's
something.
back. Melissa has something.
She's back.
Teacher.
Melissa?
Hi. The power of the cell phone. So after the native language questions, I took a look at the accommodations, the recommended accommodations for English language learners. And the accommodation that's recommended is read aloud of test directions. in the student's native language, which in a district of our size with over 80 languages represented within our schools could lead to a translation opportunity that our city is unprepared to meet the needs of for our students. So it's, and that doesn't extend to the test questions, but it does extend to the directions. So I wanted to make sure that you had that information accurate.
And a lot of those children don't have enough language skills to do the test, and you can read the directions all you want to them, right?
That was a very strength-based way to say we can't do that.
Yeah. So could I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
So Melissa, would you say that if we are not able, if emerging bilinguals are not able, because of this lack of accommodation and translation, be able to take this test, are there other assessments that we can use in order to assess our students' skills and have teachers and parents and students understand where they're at?
That the state will allow.
Skills, yeah.
That, well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, we refer in here to that there are other assessments, that this is not, this is obviously a huge one, and that's one of the issues of how long it will take. But
Right. So there are other assessments that the state uses to take a look both at English language acquisition, but also about what students know and are able
Right.
to do. Part of the difficulty with the number of languages that we have represented is you really do need students to have a certain level of language acquisition in order to get as deeply into
Right.
the knowledge that they need to have. So it is not probable that we would ever be able to get to the depth of content area knowledge for our students who are, for example, newcomers into the country speaking a language other than one of our 5 major languages, which we're able to really well support at this point in time. We do use assessments that are translated into Spanish. Spanish is really the best assessment or best supported language for assessments in literacy and in mathematics, and we do that presently right now. So we're able to test students in their native language if it's Spanish, but we don't have that same access for our other languages, such as Vietnamese, our second largest language after Spanish.
so when we have the issues around the participation and the sanctions around lack of participation, as well as not meeting or exceeding benchmark, and the labeling and the sanctions and all the negative things that go with that. At the same time, of course, we all want also the accountability and not having subgroups being hidden or not paid attention to. So like, what is that balance of being able to have that accountability without having it be something that's impossible to achieve or unrealistic, or that we don't have the tools for? And there's no answer to that question. I'm just putting it out there.
Thank you.
So can I respond to something Steve just said about our test scores going down? You know, as I've looked at a couple of sample questions from the Smarter Balance test, I mean, some of the questions I think actually are much better than in the
That's
past.
correct.
Much better, and they do a much better job of really assessing what the kid knows or doesn't know. I think our big issue is around communication, and I know, again, when I was at the Oregon School Boards Association, one of the things that the board said to that organization also is, we just all need to be massively communicating to our parents and to our community, and also Portland Public Schools Communications Department, what Common Core is, because there's just such a lack of information out there, and we need to be setting an expectation that this is a more difficult and more complex test that the kids are going to be taking, and we do expect that scores will go down. They will go down, we know that. And that shouldn't be a freak out, it should be just understood. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad way to go, it's just a different kind of an assessment. And you're not comparing apples and apples to what was. So I do think we have a huge communications challenge, and I think pretty much every district across Oregon and across the United States understands.
And with
that.
children too, right? We're communicating to children. that
Absolutely.
this is
They're not a failure.
Because, I
Right.
mean, one of the things that these tests do, all the tests, even the hoax, it's the reason that I was opposed to the hoax, is they're really destructive of children's
Right,
confidence.
and that's why we have some of
and
our
it's
language in
not in the
there.
little give everybody a trophy thing. They're really nasty with a lot of kids. They're
So I
really
do think
upset
that that's
about
a
it.
huge piece of our work in the next year is to be helping work with other organizations around Oregon and nationally to get that word out, and maybe with the Oregonians' help and some of our other, communications partners to, we need to be informing folks of what
Yeah.
the Common Core is and what our expectations are with this new assessment.
And Council at Great City Schools has actually produced a number of things,
Yeah.
trying to make them
Help.
available to districts to
Exactly.
support that.
Including things like public service announcements and,
Mhm.
written materials, so,
Mhm.
in several different languages, so.
80.
Well, can I
Pardon?
just say thank
80
you?
languages.
Not in 80 languages,
Can I
no.
say thank you especially to Ruth, but also to Steve, to Greg, to Andrew, to,
Gwen,
everyone.
coming to the meeting to have that
Gwen.
conversation. That's great.
I'm actually really, I don't know that other boards are looking at putting out statements like this. I think it's a really important conversation for us to be stepping into in this way. So I really appreciate
Mhm.
your corralling all of us to get to this point.